The scent of jasmine and dying roses hung heavy in the grand hall, a sickly sweet perfume that couldn't quite mask the underlying tension crackling through the air like static before a storm. I stood at the very edge of the gathered crowd, my fingers twisted into the rough fabric of my dress, a hand-me-down that had seen better days, its gray color doing nothing to help me blend into the sea of silk and jewels surrounding me. My pale hair, which I'd tried desperately to tame into something presentable, fell in wisps around my face, and I knew without looking that I appeared exactly as I felt. Small, forgettable, wrong. The lunar blessing ceremony happened once every decade, and this year's event carried a weight that pressed down on everyone present. The Alpha King himself would choose a bride tonight. Not just any bride, his queen, his mate, the woman who would stand beside him as he ruled over the 7 territories. Every eligible woman from every pack had been summoned, dressed in their finest, their wolves preened and proud. Everyone except me, it seemed. My wolf had never emerged, never answered my desperate calls during the shifts when the full moon sang through my bones and left me writhing in pain with nothing to show for it but exhaustion and shame. Rejected Omega, they called me, though even that title felt too generous. An Omega without a wolf was less than nothing in a world where power was measured by the strength of one's beast. My own pack barely tolerated my existence, and I knew, everyone knew, that I'd been brought here tonight, not as a genuine candidate, but as a formality, a reminder of what not to be. The hall itself was magnificent, almost cruel in its beauty. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadows, punctuated by chandeliers that dripped crystal and candlelight. Marble columns rose like ancient trees, and between them, the assembled packs had arranged themselves according to hierarchy. The strongest, most beautiful she-wolves positioned themselves near the center, where the Alpha King would walk. Their confidence radiated outward in waves that pushed against my skin like physical force. I had tried to leave earlier, had actually made it to the doors before my pack's beta, a cruel woman named Helena, had caught my arm with claws that drew blood through the thin sleeve of my dress. "You'll stay," she'd hissed, her breath hot against my ear. "You'll stay and remember your place. Remember what happens to those who think they can escape their nature." I remembered. I always remembered. The memory came unbidden, as it often did in moments of stress. My mother's face, pale and drawn, in the days before she'd simply walked into the forest and never returned. "You have something they don't understand," she'd whispered to me once, her hand cool against my fevered forehead during another failed shift. "Something deeper than teeth and claws. Don't let them convince you that invisible means powerless." But she'd been gone for 5 years now. And whatever that something was, it had never revealed itself. I'd been left alone with her cryptic words and the growing certainty that she'd been wrong, that love had made her see potential where there was only emptiness. A hush fell over the crowd, spreading like spilled wine across silk. He was coming. I felt him before I saw him, a pressure in the air, a change in the very atmosphere of the room. The assembled wolves responded instinctively, backs straightening, chins lifting, every woman present suddenly radiating their best qualities like flowers turning toward the sun. I shrank further back until my shoulders pressed against the cold stone wall. Then he entered, and the world contracted to a single point of focus. Alpha King Demon Silvercrest was not what I'd expected. The rumors had painted him as a monster, a king who'd taken the throne through blood and brutality, who ruled with an iron fist and showed no mercy to those who challenged him. They said he'd killed his own father in single combat, that he'd unified the territories through fear alone, that his wolf was so powerful it could tear through stone, but the man who walked through those doors looked tired. Oh, he was imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a predator's grace that made every other male in the room seem clumsy by comparison. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his eyes, when they swept across the crowd, were the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes. He wore his authority like armor, and I could see the power coiled in every line of his body. But there was something in his expression, something in the set of his jaw, and the tightness around his eyes, that spoke of a burden carried too long. He looked like a man going through motions he'd lost faith in. The ceremony began with the traditional words, spoken by an elder whose voice cracked with age and reverence. The Alpha King would walk among the assembled women, and his wolf would know its mate by scent, by instinct, by the inexplicable pull that bound true mates together across time and circumstance. It was supposed to be romantic, fated, inevitable. I watched as he began his progression through the crowd, watched as beautiful women stepped forward, offering their throats in the traditional gesture of submission and trust, watched as he moved past each one with barely a glance, his expression growing more shuttered with each rejection. Some of the women looked devastated, others angry. A few maintained their composure, but I could see the hurt in the tightness of their smiles. He was searching for something he didn't believe he'd find. I understood that feeling intimately. The crowd shifted as he moved deeper into the hall, and I found myself inadvertently pushed forward, no longer hidden by the protective barrier of bodies. Panic fluttered in my chest. I didn't belong here, in this spotlight, in this moment. I was supposed to be invisible, supposed to be nothing. But then his path brought him closer to my section, and one of the she-wolves from my own pack, a beauty named Seraphina who'd made my life miserable since childhood, stepped directly into his path with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "My king," she purred, her voice like honey and silk. "I am of the Nightshade pack, strongest in—" He walked past her as if she hadn't spoken. The rejection rippled through the assembled wolves like a physical blow. Seraphina's face flushed red, then white. Around me, I could feel the growing tension, the confusion. He'd rejected the most beautiful, the most powerful, the most eligible. What was he looking for? And then, somehow, impossibly, he was standing directly in front of me. I hadn't stepped forward. I hadn't offered my throat. I'd been trying to disappear into the wall itself, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs from the inside. But he'd stopped, his massive frame blocking out the rest of the room, and those storm cloud eyes were fixed on my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You," he said, and his voice was deeper than I'd imagined, rougher, like gravel and dark honey. "What's your name?" My mouth went dry. Around us, I could feel hundreds of eyes turning, could hear the whispers starting like wind through dead leaves. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a mistake. "Alara," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Alara." "Alara," he repeated, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, confusion, something else I couldn't name. His nostrils flared slightly, and I realized he was scenting me, testing the air between us for the pheromones that would indicate a mate bond. The silence stretched impossibly long. I wanted to run, wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere but under this terrible scrutiny. My pack members were staring, Helena's face twisted with something between shock and rage. This was wrong. All wrong. "You don't have a wolf," he said finally, and it wasn't a question. Shame burned through me, hot and familiar. "No, my king, I don't." He should have walked away then, should have moved on to the next candidate, the next possibility. This was where the rejection would come, where I would be dismissed in front of everyone, proof positive of my worthlessness. But instead, Alpha King Demon Silvercrest did something that would change everything. He reached out, and with surprising gentleness, lifted my chin with his fingertips until I had no choice but to meet his eyes. "Look at me," he commanded softly. And when I did, when our gazes locked, I saw something that stole the breath from my lungs. Recognition. Not of me specifically, but of something in me. The same exhaustion I'd seen in him earlier. The same bone-deep weariness of fighting a world that expected you to be something you weren't. He saw me. Actually saw me. "This one," he announced, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Alara of the Nightshade Pack will be my bride." The world exploded into chaos. The chaos that erupted after his announcement felt like being caught in a riptide. Voices rose in protest, confusion, disbelief. A cacophony that crashed against my ears until I couldn't distinguish individual words anymore. Just the overwhelming sensation of wrongness, of a world tilting off its axis. Through it all, Demon remained perfectly still, his hand still gently holding my chin, his eyes locked on mine as if we existed in a bubble separate from the madness surrounding us. "My king, you cannot be serious." Helena's voice cut through the noise, sharp as broken glass. She'd pushed her way forward, her face mottled with rage. "She's defective. She has no wolf, no strength, No value to offer the crown. This is an insult to every proper she-wolf here. Other voices joined hers, a mounting wave of objection. I watched Demon's jaw tighten, saw something dangerous flash in those storm cloud eyes. His hand dropped from my face. But before I could retreat, he'd moved to stand beside me, a wall of solid muscle and barely contained power between me and the hostile crowd. Are you questioning my choice? His voice hadn't risen, but it carried a weight that silenced the hall instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Are you suggesting that I, your alpha king, chosen by blood and trial, don't know my own mate when she stands before me? Mate. The word hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. He'd claimed me not just as a bride, but as his fated mate. The lie, because surely it had to be a lie, was so enormous, so impossible, that for a moment no one seemed capable of responding. Helena recovered first, though her voice had lost some of its certainty. My king, forgive me, but the bond. Surely you felt the mate bond. With her? The skepticism in her tone made it clear what she thought of that possibility. What I feel is not subject to your approval or understanding, Demon replied coldly. The decision is made. Alara will be prepared and escorted to the palace at dawn. This ceremony is concluded. He turned then, not waiting for further protest, and offered me his arm, with a formality that seemed absurdly courteous given the circumstances. I stared at it for a moment, my mind struggling to process what was happening. This had to be a cruel joke, some elaborate form of punishment I didn't understand yet, but his expression held no mockery, only a strange kind of patience, as if he knew I needed time to adjust to this new reality he'd thrust upon me. With trembling fingers, I placed my hand on his arm. The fabric of his formal jacket was soft beneath my touch, and I could feel the solid strength of him beneath it, the warmth that radiated from his skin. He led me through the parted crowd, every step feeling like walking through a dream or a nightmare. Faces blurred past, some shocked, some envious, many hostile. Serafina looked like she wanted to claw my eyes out. Others from my pack wore expressions of calculation, probably already wondering how to use this unexpected development to their advantage. We emerged into the cool night air, and I sucked in a breath, not realizing until that moment how stifled I'd felt in that hall. The moon hung heavy and full above us, its light painting everything silver. Demon didn't release my arm immediately, instead guiding me down the marble steps toward where several expensive vehicles waited, along with guards whose eyes tracked our every movement. You're afraid of me, he observed quietly, and it wasn't a question. I'm afraid of everything right now, I admitted, because what was the point of lying? I don't understand why you chose me. I don't understand any of this. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, fixed on something I couldn't see. Neither do I, he said finally, and the raw honesty in his voice made me look up at him sharply. When I walked into that hall tonight, I expected to find no one. I've attended 3 such ceremonies before, and each time, he trailed off, shaking his head. But when I caught your scent, when I saw you trying to disappear into that wall, something shifted. I can't explain it. There's no mate bond. You're right to question that, but there's something. The admission should have terrified me more, but instead, I felt a strange kinship with this powerful man who seemed as lost as I was. What happens now? I asked softly. Now you'll return to your pack for the night. Tomorrow, you'll be brought to the palace, and we'll begin the preparations for the binding ceremony. You'll have attendants, tutors, everything you need to learn what's expected of a queen. He paused, then added almost gently, I won't force anything on you, Alara. Whatever this is between us, we'll figure it out together. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted behind us. I turned to see several members of my pack emerging from the hall, led by our alpha, a grizzled man named Rowan whose authority I'd always feared. His face was unreadable as he approached, but I knew him well enough to sense the calculation behind his eyes. Alpha King, Rowan said, bowing respectfully. If I may have a word about the girl? Demon's posture shifted subtly, becoming more guarded. Speak. Alara has been a ward of our pack since her mother's passing. We've cared for her despite her limitations. I merely wish to ensure that you understand fully what you're taking on. She requires special considerations, special handling. Perhaps you should choose your next words very carefully." Demon interrupted, his voice like ice. "Because it sounds dangerously close to you, suggesting I'm incapable of caring for my own chosen bride." Rowan paled slightly but pressed on. "Of course not, my king. I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant." Demon's eyes swept over the assembled pack members, and I saw several of them flinch under his gaze. "I'm aware of how Alara has been treated in your pack. The scars on her arm, the way she stands like she's used to being struck, the fact that she owns one dress and it's barely held together, none of that escaped my notice. So when you speak of care, understand that I'm watching. If I find that she's been mistreated tonight, or at any point before she reaches my palace tomorrow, there will be consequences." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable and absolute. I stood frozen, shocked that he'd noticed so much in such a brief encounter, that he'd seen details I'd thought were invisible. Helena's face had gone ashen, and I knew she was remembering every casual cruelty, every lesson she'd delivered with claws and words designed to break. Rowan recovered his composure with visible effort. "Of course, my king. Alara will be treated with the utmost respect and delivered to you safely at dawn. See that she is." Demon turned back to me, and his expression softened slightly. "Can you endure one more night with them?" The question was asked quietly enough that only I could hear. I wanted to say no, wanted to beg him to take me away from this place immediately, but pride, the same stubborn pride that had kept me alive through years of rejection, made me lift my chin. "I've endured worse," I said, which was true enough. Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or sadness. "I believe you have," he murmured. Then, in a gesture that sent gasps rippling through the watching crowd, he lifted my hand and pressed his lips to my knuckles, a formal kiss that nevertheless felt intimate in its gentleness. "Until dawn then, Alara, be strong a little longer." He released me and stepped back, nodding to one of his guards. "Escort her home safely. Station yourselves outside the pack house. If anyone approaches her with ill intent, you have my permission to intervene." The guards moved immediately, flanking me with a professionalism that made it clear this wasn't a request. Demon held my gaze for one more moment, and I thought I saw something vulnerable flash across his face. Hope, maybe, or fear that this gamble he'd taken would prove disastrous. Then he was gone, sliding into one of the waiting vehicles with a fluid grace that reminded me he was far more than just a man. The vehicle pulled away, taking him back toward the distant palace whose spires I could just make out against the moonlit sky. I was left standing with my pack and 2 royal guards, the weight of what had just happened settling onto my shoulders like a physical burden. Helena approached, her movement stiff with barely contained fury, but one of the guards shifted slightly, a subtle reminder of the Alpha King's warning. She stopped just outside arm's reach, her lips pulled back from her teeth, in something that might have been a smile, but looked more like a snarl. "Quite the performance," she hissed. "Do you really think this will last? That a king would truly want something like you? He's playing some game, using you for purposes we don't understand yet. And when he's done, when he casts you aside, you'll come crawling back here, and we'll remember this moment." I wanted to tell her she was probably right, that I thought the same things, that I was terrified of being a pawn in something I couldn't comprehend. But the memory of Demon's hand on my chin, the way he'd looked at me like I was something precious rather than broken, made me straighten my spine. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but until then, I'm going to be a queen, and you're going to have to bow." The shock on her face was worth every terrified heartbeat thundering in my chest. The walk back to the pack house felt surreal, the guard's presence ensuring that no one dared approach me, though I could feel eyes watching from every shadow. When we reached the small room I'd occupied for years, barely more than a closet with a thin mattress and a single window, one of the guards inspected it briefly before taking up position outside my door. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking with delayed reaction. In less than 12 hours, my entire existence had been upended. Tomorrow I would leave this place, possibly forever, and enter a world I knew nothing about. I would stand beside a man who wielded enough power to reshape territories, who'd chosen me for reasons neither of us fully understood. And somewhere in the darkness of that same night, that man sat in his palace, perhaps wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake, if the strange pull he'd felt toward a wolfless Omega would prove to be his undoing. Neither of us slept much that night, I suspected, both of us caught between an ending and a beginning, unsure which would bring salvation and which would bring ruin. The moon watched through my window, silent and knowing, counting down the hours until dawn. Bloco 3. Dawn arrived with a gentleness that felt at odds with the upheaval in my chest. I'd spent the night in a state between waking and dreaming, every sound making me flinch, half expecting Helena or one of the others to find some way around the guards, some method of delivering one final punishment before I slipped beyond their reach. But the guards had remained steadfast, and when pale light finally began filtering through my small window, I was still untouched, still whole. I had nothing to pack. The realization was both humiliating and oddly freeing. My entire existence fit into the clothes on my back, and a few small items that held more sentimental value than practical use. My mother's hairbrush with its cracked handle, a book of pressed flowers we'd collected together, a sketch she'd drawn of me as a child, smiling in a way I hadn't smiled in years. I wrapped these carefully in the spare cloth I used as a pillowcase, my hands moving through the familiar motions while my mind remained elsewhere. The sound of vehicles approaching pulled me to the window. 3 sleek black cars rolled up to the pack house, their polished surfaces reflecting the morning sun like dark mirrors. They screamed wealth and power, so out of place in our modest territory that several pack members had emerged from their homes to stare. The guards at my door knocked softly, respectfully, a courtesy I'd never experienced before. "Miss Ilara, your transport has arrived." Miss. Not Omega, not girl, not any of the diminutive or cruel names I'd grown accustomed to. Just a simple title that acknowledged my existence as a person rather than a problem. I opened the door to find not just the guards, but a woman I didn't recognize, elegant, perhaps in her 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that assessed me with professional interest rather than judgment. "I am Iris," she said, her voice warm and cultured. "I serve as the palace's chief attendant. The Alpha King sent me to ensure your comfort during the journey." Her gaze swept over my threadbare dress, and I saw something flicker in her expression. Anger, quickly masked. "We'll take care of everything once we reach the palace. For now, shall we?" She offered her hand as if I were someone worth touching, someone whose dignity mattered. I took it, my fingers trembling slightly, and allowed her to guide me down the narrow hallway. As we passed through the main room, I saw Helena standing near the entrance, her face a mask of false pleasantness that didn't reach her eyes. Rowan stood beside her, looking uncomfortable. "Safe travels, Ilara," Helena said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Do give our regards to the Alpha King. I'm sure you'll make us all so proud." The words were meant to cut, to remind me that I was leaving, but would never truly escape, that I carried their mark whether I wanted to or not. But Iris's hand tightened on mine, grounding me, and I found myself thinking of Demon's words from the night before, the way he'd seen my scars and known their source, the way he'd issued his warning with the full weight of his authority. "I'll be sure to tell him how well you cared for me," I replied quietly, watching the color drain from Helena's face as she realized the double edge of that statement. "I'm certain he'll be very interested in hearing every detail." I didn't wait for her response, allowing Iris to lead me outside where the morning air felt crisp and clean, free of the oppressive atmosphere that had saturated every corner of the pack house. The other pack members maintained their distance, but I could feel their stares, their confusion and resentment mixing with something that might have been envy. Serafina watched from an upper window, her beautiful face twisted with an emotion I couldn't quite name. The car was more luxurious than anything I'd ever seen, all soft leather and tinted windows. Iris settled me into the back seat with a care that suggested she understood how overwhelmed I felt, then took her place beside me while the guards occupied the other vehicles. As we pulled away, I turned to look back one final time at the only home I'd ever known, a place that had never truly wanted me, that had made sure I understood my unworthiness with every passing day. I didn't feel sad to leave it behind. I felt terrified of what lay ahead, yes, but not sad. There was nothing there worth mourning. "The journey will take approximately 3 hours," Iris said gently, pulling my attention back to the present. "Would you like some breakfast?" I brought provisions. I realized I hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon, my stomach too knotted with anxiety to consider food before the ceremony. Now it growled audibly, and I felt heat creep up my neck. Yes, thank you." She produced a basket that contained fresh pastries, fruit, and a thermos of tea that smelled like honey and herbs. As I ate, trying to be careful and neat despite my hunger, Iris began speaking in a calm, measured way that I gradually realized was intentional, designed to give me information without overwhelming me. "The palace is home to approximately 200 individuals," she explained, "including the Alpha King's personal guard, advisors, household staff, and visiting dignitaries from the various territories. It's large, yes, but you'll learn your way quickly. You'll have your own suite of rooms, of course, and personal attendants to help you adjust. The binding ceremony is scheduled for 1 week from today, which gives us time to prepare you properly." "Prepare me for what exactly?" I asked, setting down the pastry I'd been nibbling. "I don't understand what's expected of me. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't even know how to be around people who don't—" I trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. "Who don't hurt you," Iris completed softly, and there was such understanding in her voice that I felt tears prick at my eyes. "I know, child. The Alpha King briefed me on your situation. You're not the first person to arrive at the palace bearing scars, visible and invisible, and you won't be the last. We'll teach you what you need to know, but more importantly, we'll give you time to heal." The Alpha King was very specific about that. "Why?" The question burst out of me before I could stop it. Why did he choose me? Why is he being kind? What does he want from me that he couldn't get from someone stronger? Someone with a wolf? Someone who actually belongs in his world? Iris regarded me thoughtfully, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "I've served the Alpha King for 5 years, she said finally. "I was there when he took the throne, when he fought his way through challenges that would have broken lesser men. I've seen him make decisions that shaped the future of all our territories. And in all that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you last night, when he returned to the palace." "How did he look at me?" I whispered. "Like someone who'd found something he didn't know he'd been searching for." She paused, then added, "The Alpha King is powerful, Alara, but he's also lonely. Terribly, deeply lonely in a way that has nothing to do with being surrounded by people. He spent years being what everyone needed him to be. Strong, decisive, merciless when necessary. He's the king they wanted, the ruler they needed, but I don't think anyone has ever seen him as simply him. A man, not just an alpha. Not until you." The words settled over me like snowfall, quiet and transformative. I thought about the exhaustion I'd seen in his face, the way he'd admitted he didn't understand his choice any more than I did. 2 broken people, both of us trying to survive in a world that had never quite fit right. "I'm going to disappoint him," I said softly. "I'm going to fail at this. Perhaps," Iris agreed, which was oddly comforting in its honesty. "Or perhaps you'll both surprise yourselves. Growth happens in unexpected places, child. Sometimes the things we think are our greatest weaknesses turn out to be exactly what someone else needs." The landscape had changed as we traveled. The modest territories giving way to more prosperous lands, then to the royal territory itself. Through the window, I could see forests thick with ancient trees, clear water streams that caught the sunlight, and eventually, rising in the distance like something from a dream, the palace itself. It was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, constructed of pale stone that seemed to glow in the morning light. It rose from the landscape with towers and spires that pierced the sky. Gardens surrounded it, carefully maintained but somehow still wild, and I could see figures moving in the distance. Guards, I assumed, or staff going about their morning duties. "Welcome to Silvercrest Palace," Iris said quietly. "Your new home." The cars passed through massive gates guarded by warriors whose alertness was palpable even from inside the vehicle. We drove up a long, winding path lined with trees whose branches formed a canopy overhead, dappling everything in shifting patterns of light and shadow. My heart hammered harder with each passing moment, each foot closer to this new life I'd been thrust into. The vehicles finally stopped before a grand entrance where marble steps led up to doors that looked heavy enough to withstand a siege. As I emerged from the car, still clutching my pathetic bundle of belongings, I became aware of people gathering. Staff members, I realized, lined up in a sort of informal welcome. Their faces showed curiosity, some skepticism, but nothing like the open hostility I was accustomed to. And standing at the top of the steps, backlit by the morning sun streaming through the open doors behind him, was Demon. He'd changed from the formal attire of the ceremony into simpler clothes, dark pants and a shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with scars that told stories of battles fought and survived. His hair was tied back, and without the trappings of ceremony, he looked younger, more approachable, but those storm-cloud eyes held the same intensity as they tracked my progress up the steps. "Ilara," he said as I reached him, and my name in his voice still felt like something precious, something I didn't quite know how to hold. "Did you sleep?" The question was so unexpected, so mundane and caring, that I almost laughed. "Not much," I admitted. "You?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not at all." He glanced at the bundle in my arms, and I saw his jaw tighten. "Is that everything you own?" Shame burned through me. Yes. For a moment, something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Not directed at me, but at the pack I'd left behind, at the life that had given me so little. Then he took a breath and extended his hand. "Then we'll remedy that. Come, let me show you your rooms, and then we have much to discuss." I placed my hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as they closed gently around mine. The assembled staff bowed as we passed, and I caught glimpses of their faces, curious, reserved, but not unkind. Iris followed at a discreet distance as Demon led me through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past rooms that promised comfort and luxury I'd never imagined. Finally, he stopped before a set of double doors carved with intricate designs, wolves running beneath a full moon, their forms fluid and graceful. "These are your chambers," he said, pushing the doors open to reveal a suite that stole my breath. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the gardens. The main room was decorated in soft blues and silvers, with furniture that looked both elegant and comfortable. Through an open doorway, I could see a bedroom with a bed large enough for 3 people, piled with pillows and covered in fabric that looked impossibly soft. Another door revealed a bathroom with a tub that could have doubled as a small pool. "This can't be for me," I whispered. "It is," Demon said firmly. "All of it. Your space. Your sanctuary. I have chambers in the other wing. We won't be sharing rooms until you're ready, if you're ever ready. No pressure, Ilara. I meant what I said last night." I turned to face him. This powerful man who'd upended my world, and was now offering me freedom within my captivity. "Why?" I asked again, because I still didn't understand. Why me? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching my face as if the answer might be written there. "Ask me that again in a week," he said finally. "After you've settled in, after you've seen what this life actually looks like. If you still want to know then, I'll try to answer. But right now, honestly, I'm still trying to figure it out myself." It was perhaps the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. "Now," he continued, his voice becoming more businesslike even as his hand remained gentle on mine, "Iris will help you get settled. There are clothes in the wardrobe, and anything that doesn't fit or that you don't like, we'll replace. This afternoon, if you're feeling up to it, I'd like you to join me for a meal, just the 2 of us. No ceremony, no pressure, just a chance to talk." "I'd like that," I said, and realized I meant it. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look less like a fearsome alpha king and more like a man who'd just been given an unexpected gift. He lifted my hand and pressed another kiss to my knuckles, this one lingering a moment longer than the previous night. Until this afternoon, then. He left, and I stood in the center of my new rooms, surrounded by luxury I'd never deserved, and kindness I didn't know how to accept, wondering if this was how it felt to step from one life into another, terrifying and exhilarating and utterly, completely surreal. Outside my windows, the gardens beckoned with promises of exploration. Inside, Iris moved efficiently, already making plans for my transformation. And somewhere in another wing of this vast palace, a lonely king sat contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought a broken Omega into his carefully controlled world. Neither of us knowing yet how completely we would change each other. The afternoon found me transformed in ways that felt both superficial and profound. Iris had been a patient guide through the overwhelming process of selecting clothes from the wardrobe, an array of options that had made my head spin. She'd chosen simple things for me to start, elegant but comfortable, and now I wore a dress of soft dove gray that fit properly, that moved with me instead of hanging like a punishment. My hair had been washed and arranged, the pale strands finally looking intentional rather than neglected. But it was the bath that had undone me. Hot water, endless and clean, scented with oils that turned the steam fragrant. I'd stayed in until my skin pruned, washing away layers of grime and shame, emerging pink and raw and feeling oddly new. When I'd caught my reflection in the mirror afterward, I'd barely recognized the girl staring back, still thin, still marked with the evidence of a hard life, but somehow more present, more real. Now I stood outside the doors to what Iris had called the informal dining room, my heart performing acrobatics in my chest. A guard stood nearby, his expression professionally neutral, but he'd nodded respectfully when I'd approached. That small gesture of acknowledgement still felt foreign, like wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. What was I supposed to say to him? How did one make conversation with a king who'd chosen you for reasons even he couldn't explain? The weight of my inadequacy pressed down, familiar and suffocating. Before I could spiral further, the door opened from the inside, and Demon stood there, still in the same simple clothes from earlier, his hair now loose around his shoulders. His expression softened when he saw me, and I watched something like relief flicker across his features. "I heard you pacing," he said with a gentle humor that surprised me. "The guards are trained to notice everything, but I think even the kitchen staff 3 floors down could hear your anxiety." Heat crept up my neck. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Elara." He said my name like a full stop, waiting until I met his eyes. "I wasn't criticizing. I was trying to let you know that you're not alone in being nervous. I've been rearranging the silverware for the past 10 minutes because I didn't know what to do with my hands." The admission was so unexpected, so vulnerably honest, that I felt something loosen in my chest. "You're nervous. You're the Alpha King." "Yes. And I've faced down enemy armies with less trepidation than this meal." He stepped back, gesturing me inside. "Turns out threatening people with violence is significantly easier than trying to have an actual conversation with someone you're supposed to be building a life with." The room was smaller than I'd expected, though still larger than any space I'd ever eaten in. A table was set for 2, laden with more food than seemed necessary. Roasted meats, fresh bread, vegetables prepared in ways that made them look like art, fruits I didn't recognize. Windows overlooked the gardens, where the afternoon sun painted everything gold. Demon held out a chair for me, another gesture of courtesy that felt surreal. As I sat, I noticed his hands were shaking slightly, barely perceptible, but there. The realization that he was genuinely nervous somehow made everything feel less impossible. "I didn't know what you liked," he said, taking his own seat across from me. "So I had the kitchen prepare a variety. Whatever you don't eat won't go to waste. The staff will have it, and they're grateful for any excuse to sample the chef's best work." We began serving ourselves, the process awkward at first, neither of us quite sure of the rhythm. But gradually, as the initial tension eased, something resembling normalcy began to emerge. Demon asked simple questions: what I thought of my rooms, if the bath had been adequate, whether I needed anything. I answered carefully, still half expecting a trap, but his interest seemed genuine. "Tell me about your mother," he said eventually, his tone gentle. "Iris mentioned you lost her some years ago." The question caught me off guard, and I felt the familiar ache of her absence rise up. "She died when I was 15, or rather, she disappeared. She walked into the forest one morning and never came back. They searched for 3 days before declaring her gone. I'm sorry. The words were simple but carried weight. Were you close? She was all I had. The admission came easier than I'd expected. She never made me feel broken, even when everyone else did. She used to say I had gifts that couldn't be seen, that not having a wolf didn't make me less. I think she believed it, even if I never could. Demon was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on his glass. My father told me that weakness was death, he said finally. That every moment of softness, every instant of mercy, was an invitation for someone to destroy you. He ruled through fear, and he taught me to do the same. He looked up, meeting my eyes. It took me years to understand that he was wrong. That the strongest thing I could do was admit I didn't have all the answers, that I didn't want to rule through terror alone. Is that why you killed him? The question escaped before I could stop it, and I immediately wished I could take it back. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's all right. Everyone knows the story, or thinks they do. He set down his glass with deliberate care. Yes, I killed him. He challenged me in front of the assembled alphas, and I won. But it wasn't about power, not really. He was going to start a war, one that would have decimated our territories for his own pride. I tried to reason with him first, tried everything else. He wouldn't listen. So I did what needed to be done. And I've carried that weight every day since. The pain in his voice was palpable. And I understood suddenly that his scars went far deeper than the ones visible on his skin. Do you regret it? I regret that it was necessary. I regret that he never gave me another choice. But I don't regret protecting our people from his madness. He paused, then asked, Does it frighten you? Knowing what I'm capable of, I considered the question honestly, examining my feelings. No, I said finally. What frightens me is cruelty for its own sake, violence for pleasure. What you describe sounds like burden. Like you did something terrible because the alternative was worse. Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. Most people see me as a monster. They're not entirely wrong. I've done things that haunt me, made decisions that cost lives. But I've tried to be the king our territories needed, even when it meant becoming someone I didn't always recognize. And now? I asked softly. Who are you trying to be now? He leaned back, a wry smile touching his lips. Honestly, I'm trying to figure out if it's possible to be both a king and just a person. Someone who can have conversations over meals without constantly calculating threats and alliances. Someone who can choose a bride because something about her felt right, rather than because it made political sense. We're quite a pair, I observed, surprising myself with the hint of humor in my voice. A king who doesn't know how to be human, and an Omega who doesn't know how to be anything at all. You're more than nothing, Alara. His voice carried conviction that made me want to believe him. You survived years in a pack that should have protected you, but instead made you a target. You walked into that ceremony knowing you'd be rejected, humiliated, and you held your head up anyway. That's not nothing. That's steel wrapped in softness. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I blinked them back, focusing on my plate. I don't feel strong. Neither do I most days, but we keep going anyway, don't we? We survive. We ate in companionable silence for a while, the pressure of constant conversation easing into something more comfortable. I found myself watching him when I thought he wasn't looking. The way he moved with unconscious grace. The way his expression would shift between public mask and private vulnerability. He was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional handsomeness, and everything to do with presence, with the gravity of who he was. I need to tell you something, Demon said eventually, his tone becoming more serious. About next week's ceremony. My stomach clenched. What about it? It's not just a binding ceremony. It's also when I'll formally present you to the assembled alphas from all the territories. They'll be coming to witness our union, but also to assess. To see if you're suitable, if this choice I made undermines my authority. He held up a hand before I could spiral. I'm not saying this to frighten you. I'm saying it because you deserve to know what you're walking into. Some of them will be hostile. They'll see you as a weakness, a crack in my armor they can exploit. They're right, aren't they? My voice came out smaller than I intended. I am a weakness. I can't defend you, can't fight beside you, Can't even shift. How am I supposed to stand in front of these powerful alphas and convince them I belong beside you? Demon stood, moving around the table to kneel beside my chair, bringing himself to my eye level. The gesture was so unexpected that I froze, my breath catching. Up close, I could see flecks of silver in his storm cloud eyes, could count the small scars on his face that told stories of violence survived. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice intense but not unkind. "You're not supposed to convince them of anything. I chose you. That's the end of it. They can accept it or they can challenge me. But either way, the decision is made. What I need from you isn't strength of the kind they value. I have that, more than enough for both of us. What I need is someone who sees the world differently, who hasn't been corrupted by the constant battles for dominance, someone who understands what it means to survive without power." "Why would you need that?" "Because I'm tired, Alara." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I'm tired of ruling through fear and strength alone. I'm tired of being isolated by my own power. I look at you, and I see someone who's learned to navigate a hostile world through intelligence and endurance rather than force. That's a kind of strength I never learned, and I think I need it. I think we need each other, even if neither of us understands exactly how yet." His hand came up slowly, giving me time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of hair from my face. The touch was electric, sending warmth cascading through me. "I won't let them hurt you," he promised. "And I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing, even when it feels like I don't." "What if I fail you?" The question was barely a whisper. "What if you don't?" He smiled, that same transformation that made him look young and hopeful. "What if we both surprise everyone, including ourselves?" A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Demon stood smoothly, his expression shifting back to something more guarded as he called, "Enter." One of the guards stepped in, bowing respectfully. "My king, forgive the intrusion. Alpha Matthias of the Northern Territory has arrived early. He requests an audience." I watched Demon's jaw tighten, saw his shoulders square as he slipped back into the role of king like donning armor. "Of course. Tell him I'll meet him in the formal receiving room in 10 minutes. The guard bowed again and retreated. Demon turned back to me, frustration flickering across his features. "I'm sorry. Matthias is difficult. He'll have heard about my choice by now, and he's never been one for subtlety. He'll want to measure you up, find weaknesses he can exploit." Fear coiled in my stomach, but I forced myself to stand, to meet his gaze. "Should I meet him with you? Not today." "Not until you're ready." He paused, then added, "But soon. And Alara? When you do meet them, Matthias and the others, remember that you don't owe them anything. Not explanations, not apologies, not justifications for existing. You're going to be my queen. They'll need to adjust their expectations accordingly." He left with that declaration hanging in the air, and I stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remains of our meal and the echoes of his words. Through the windows, I could see the sun beginning its descent, painting the gardens in shades of amber and rose. In the distance, I heard voices, deep, commanding, the sound of alphas gathering to assess the king's unexpected choice. They would be formidable, I knew. They would look at me and see everything I wasn't. No wolf, no power, no traditional qualifications to stand beside their king, but Demon had chosen me anyway. Had knelt beside my chair and told me I was needed. Had promised protection and asked for trust. And somewhere in the space between terror and possibility, I felt something unfamiliar stirring. Not hope exactly, but perhaps its distant cousin, the sense that maybe, just maybe, I could become something more than the broken girl who'd spent her life trying to disappear. Iris appeared in the doorway, her expression sympathetic. "Come, child. Let's get you settled for the evening. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, and you'll need your rest." I followed her through the corridors, my mind churning with everything that had been said, everything implied. Behind a closed door somewhere, Demon faced down an alpha who would judge his choice, who would look for cracks in his armor. And I realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and galvanizing, that I didn't want to be his weakness. I wanted to find a way to be his strength, even if I had no idea how to accomplish that yet. The evening deepened outside my windows as I prepared for bed in luxury that still felt borrowed. Tomorrow would bring new trials, new fears to face. But tonight, I would rest in safety, surrounded by softness instead of cruelty. It was more than I'd had yesterday, and perhaps that was enough to build on. The week that followed passed in a blur of preparation and transformation. Iris became my anchor, guiding me through etiquette lessons that felt like learning a new language, teaching me how to move through rooms full of power without shrinking into invisibility. Other attendants came and went. A woman named Mora who taught me about the territories and their complex political relationships. A quiet man called Silas, who explained pack hierarchies and traditions I'd never been important enough to learn. But it was the evenings with Demon that became my touchstone. Each night, we shared a meal in that same informal dining room, and with each conversation, the walls between us grew thinner. He told me about the weight of decisions that affected thousands, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted things from him, but never simply wanted him. I told him about my mother's strange certainty that I was meant for something more, about the small rebellions that had kept my spirit alive when everything else tried to crush it. We didn't touch beyond those formal kisses to my hand, but there was an intimacy in the sharing that felt more profound than physical contact. We were learning each other, piece by careful piece. On the 6th day, Demon brought me to meet his inner circle, the advisors and warriors who formed the backbone of his rule. I'd been terrified, but they'd been curious, cautious, certainly, but not cruel. A female warrior named Cassia had even smiled at me, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Anyone who makes the Alpha King look that relaxed has already done the impossible, she'd said. Welcome, Alara. It wasn't acceptance, not fully, but it was a beginning. Now, on the morning of the ceremony, I stood in my chambers while an army of attendants prepared me for the role I was about to assume. The dress they'd created was breathtaking. Layers of silver and white that seemed to shift and shimmer with every movement, neither entirely one color nor the other. My pale hair had been arranged in an intricate style that looked both elegant and wild, woven with small crystals that caught the light. Looking at my reflection, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who belonged in this world of power and ceremony. But beneath the beautiful exterior, I was still the same frightened girl who'd tried to disappear into walls. You look like a queen, Iris said softly, appearing behind me in the mirror, but more importantly, do you feel ready? No, I admitted. But I don't think I ever will be, so I might as well do it scared, she smiled, something warm and proud in her expression. The Alpha King will be waiting in the ceremonial hall. The Alphas are already assembled, all 7 territories represented. It will be intense. But remember what he told you. You don't owe them anything but your presence. The walk to the ceremonial hall felt eternal. Guards flanked me, and I could feel eyes watching from every corridor as word spread that the ceremony was beginning. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs, but I kept my chin up, kept my steps steady. I'd survived worse than judgment. I could survive this. The doors to the hall opened, and the sheer scope of what awaited stole my breath. Hundreds of people filled the massive space. Alphas and their entourages, representatives from every territory, all turned to watch as I entered. At the far end, on a raised platform, Demon stood waiting, dressed in formal attire that made him look every inch the powerful king he was. But when his eyes found mine across that vast distance, I saw the man beneath the crown, nervous, hopeful, asking me silently if I could do this impossible thing. I began walking down the aisle created by the assembled crowd. Every step felt weighted with significance. I could feel their assessment, their skepticism, their confusion about why their powerful king had chosen someone so obviously inadequate. Whispers followed in my wake, not quite quiet enough to miss. "No wolf," someone murmured. What was he thinking? She'll weaken him. Each comment was a small blade, but I'd learned long ago how to bleed quietly. I kept my eyes fixed on Demon, using him as my North Star, my reason to keep moving forward instead of turning and fleeing like every instinct screamed at me to do. As I climbed the steps to the platform, he extended his hand. I took it, and his fingers closed around mine with gentle strength. "Breathe," he whispered. So quietly, only I could hear. I've got you. The elder who would perform the ceremony stepped forward, the same ancient man who'd presided over the choosing ceremony. His voice, cracked with age, nevertheless carried across the hall. We are gathered to witness the binding of Alpha King Demon Silvercrest to his chosen mate, Alara of Nightshade. Before the assembled alphas of all territories, before the moon and stars, before the spirits of our ancestors, we ask, does any here challenge this union? The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. I felt Demon's hand tighten on mine, felt the tension radiating through him. This was the moment when someone could object, could challenge his choice and demand satisfaction through combat or argument. A voice rang out. I challenge. The hall erupted in murmurs. I turned to see a massive alpha stepping forward. Matthias of the Northern Territory, the one who'd arrived early. He was enormous, radiating power and aggression, his eyes fixed on Demon with something between contempt and calculation. On what grounds? Demon's voice was cold, deadly calm. On the grounds that this choice weakens the crown. You've chosen a wolfless Omega with no power, no connections, no ability to strengthen our territories through alliance. This isn't a mate bond. There's no evidence of one. This is a king's moment of weakness, and we deserve better. The accusation hung in the air. Around us, I could feel the assembled alphas waiting, watching to see how Demon would respond. My stomach churned with fear and shame. Matthias wasn't wrong. Everything he'd said was true. I was weakness personified, standing beside a king who deserved someone magnificent. But Demon didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his presence expanding to fill the space, reminding everyone why he was king. You question my judgment, Matthias? After 5 years of peace and prosperity under my rule, after I've expanded trade, settled territorial disputes, and strengthened every pack under my protection, you think I've suddenly lost the ability to make sound decisions? I think you've confused loneliness with love, Matthias shot back. I think you saw a pretty broken thing and let sentiment override strategy. And I think every alpha here is too afraid of you to say it. Demon's smile was sharp as a blade. Then, by all means, let's remove fear from the equation. You've challenged my choice. Name your terms. Single combat. If I win, you set her aside and choose a proper mate from among the candidates. And when I win, Demon replied, his voice dropping to something dangerous, you will bow to Alara as your queen and speak her name with the respect it deserves. Every alpha here will witness your submission. The hall had gone utterly silent. This was more than just a challenge to Demon's choice. It was a challenge to his authority, to his ability to rule without being questioned. Matthias had to know that, had to understand the risk, but his eyes gleamed with confidence born of his own considerable strength. Agreed, Matthias said. No. My voice cut through the tension, surprising everyone, including myself. Every eye turned to me, and I felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. But I kept speaking, kept my voice steady even as my hands shook. This isn't how this should go. Demon turned to me, confusion and concern warring in his expression. Alara, he's right, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Not about everything, but about one thing. There is no mate bond between us. We both know it. Everyone here knows it. I turned to face the assembled alphas, forcing myself to meet their stares. But he's wrong about what that means. I took a breath, gathering every scrap of courage I possessed. I don't have a wolf. I don't have power in any traditional sense. I can't fight beside the Alpha King in battle, can't strengthen alliances through family connections, can't even shift to protect myself. By every measure your world uses to assign value, I'm worthless. The words hung in the air, each one a truth I'd lived with all my life. But I wasn't finished. But here's what I can do, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I can see clearly because I'm not blinded by power. I can negotiate because I've spent my life learning to survive without violence. I can counsel, can advise, can offer perspectives that come from understanding what it means to be vulnerable in a world of predators. Your king has spent years being what you needed him to be, strong, fierce, unyielding. Maybe what he needs now is someone who reminds him that there's more to leadership than dominance. Maybe what you all need is a queen who can bridge the gap between power and compassion. I turned back to Matthias, meeting his skeptical gaze directly. You want to challenge me? Fine. But not through combat. I'd lose, and we both know it. Challenge me through something I can actually do. Give me a problem your territory faces. Something that's defied solution through traditional means. Give me 1 week to solve it. If I fail, I'll step aside willingly. But if I succeed, you accept that strength comes in many forms. The hall erupted in murmurs. It was unprecedented, audacious, possibly foolish. But Matthias looked intrigued despite himself. You're serious? Completely. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. The Northern Territory has been plagued by a series of disappearances. Young wolves vanishing without trace, no bodies, no evidence. It's creating panic and distrust. Our strongest warriors have found nothing. If you can solve this mystery in 1 week, I'll accept your place beside the Alpha King. Agreed. I extended my hand, a human gesture in a wolf world. After a moment's hesitation, Matthias took it, his massive hand engulfing mine. Demon looked torn between pride and concern, but he nodded to the elder. The challenge is accepted. The binding ceremony will proceed, conditional upon its resolution. The ceremony continued, though the atmosphere had shifted from hostile skepticism to cautious curiosity when Demon and I spoke the traditional vows. When he placed a simple silver band on my finger, and I placed one on his, it felt less like an ending and more like a beginning, not just for us, but for a new way of thinking about power and partnership. That evening, as the assembled alphas feasted in the grand hall, Demon and I slipped away to a balcony overlooking the gardens. The moon hung full and heavy above us, painting everything silver. That was either brilliant or incredibly reckless, he said, though there was admiration in his voice. Probably both. I leaned against the railing, feeling the cool stone beneath my hands. I'm terrified I won't be able to solve his mystery. You will. His certainty was absolute, because you see things others miss, because you think differently, because you're exactly who I knew you were when I chose you in that hall. And what's that? He moved closer, until I could feel the warmth of him at my back. Someone brave enough to bet on herself when the world has spent years telling her she's worthless. Someone who turned a challenge to combat into a test of wit. Someone who's going to make an extraordinary queen. I turned to face him, and for the first time since we'd met, the distance between us felt like something that could be crossed. I'm still afraid, I admitted. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes, but you're not letting it stop you. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Thank you for standing beside me today. For being brave when I needed you to be. Thank you for choosing me, I whispered. Even when it made no sense, it made perfect sense. I just didn't know it yet. He kissed me then, soft and questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't. I leaned into it, into him, tasting possibility and promise, and the terrifying beauty of two broken people choosing to heal together. When we finally parted, both breathless, I rested my forehead against his chest and felt his arms come around me, solid and sure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a mystery to solve, skeptics to convince, a role to grow into. But tonight, I stood in the moonlight with a king who'd seen value where others saw only deficiency, and I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could build something extraordinary from our unexpected beginning. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But I was no longer the invisible girl trying to disappear into walls. I was Alara Silvercrest, queen-to-be, standing beside my king beneath the stars, ready to face whatever came next. Together, we would show them all that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest power lay not in dominance, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to choose compassion, to forge new paths where none existed before. And as the moon watched over us, bearing witness to promises made and challenges accepted. I understood finally what my mother had meant all those years ago. I did have something they didn't understand, not despite my lack of a wolf, but because of everything I'd survived without one. I had resilience. I had insight. I had the ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. And I had chosen a partner who valued those gifts as much as any warrior's strength. The future stretched before us, uncertain and daunting. But we would face it together, the Alpha King and his unconventional queen, rewriting the rules of what power meant, and proving that sometimes the most unlikely choices became the most transformative. The gardens below whispered in the night breeze, carrying with them the scent of jasmine and promise. And in Demon's arms, surrounded by moonlight and possibility, I finally felt like I'd come home.